There was a time when pain did not belong to one person alone. It moved like air between two bodies, unseen but constantly exchanged, inhaled without consent, exhaled without relief. One person suffered openly, bleeding emotions into words, silences, sighs, and glances, and the other learned to recognize those signals so well that the pain no longer needed language. It arrived before it was spoken. It sat down uninvited. It became familiar, even intimate, as if suffering itself were a form of connection. Carl Jung once hinted that what binds people most powerfully is not love, but unconscious participation in each other's wounds. And this was such a bond, woven not from joy, but from shared endurance. To listen was not a choice anymore. It had become an identity. To care was no longer an act. It had turned into a role. And roles, Jung warned, slowly replaced the self. In the beginning, sharing another's pain felt noble. It felt like depth, like meaning. There was a strange pride in being the one who could understand, who could stay when things were heavy, who could absorb what others avoided. The person who suffered leaned into this presence, unconsciously relieved, unconsciously dependent. Pain that is shared feels lighter, not because it lessens, but because responsibility disperses. Jung believed that when suffering is continuously mirrored, the psyche learns not to transform it. Why would it? There is comfort in repetition. There is safety in familiarity. Pain, when witnessed endlessly, becomes a home instead of a signal for change. But something subtle began to shift the day the sharing stopped. Not dramatically, not with confrontation or anger, just a quiet withdrawal. The listener no longer leaned forward at every sigh. The eyes no longer searched for hidden sorrow. The questions softened, then disappeared. Silence replaced response. Not cold silence, but neutral silence. Jung would call this the moment when projection collapses. The suffering person had unconsciously projected part of their emotional burden onto the other, and now that surface was gone. The pain had nowhere to land. At first, the suffering grew louder. Complaints sharpened. Stories repeated themselves with more urgency, as if volume could substitute for resonance. But something was missing. The familiar relief did not arrive. The pain echoed back unchanged. This was the first transformation. When pain is no longer shared, it becomes heavier, not because it increases, but because it must finally be carried alone. Jung believed that loneliness is often not the absence of people, but the absence of unconscious emotional participation. When that participation ends, the psyche panics. The person who had always shared the pain now felt something unexpected, guilt mixed with lightness. Guilt for not being good, not being supportive, not being who they had trained themselves to be. Lightness because something invisible had lifted from their chest. Jung would say that the shadow had shifted positions. The pain that once lived between them was now fully visible in the other, no longer disguised as empathy or connection. And for the first time, the listener could see clearly. This pain was not theirs to heal. This clarity did not feel kind at first. It felt selfish. Society teaches that love means absorption, that care means sacrifice, that understanding means suffering together. Jung challenged this quietly, suggesting that true compassion does not steal another's task. When you carry someone's pain for them, you rob them of the necessity to grow. Growth requires friction. It requires solitude. It requires facing one's own darkness without an audience. As days passed, the suffering person began to change, though not immediately for the better. Irritation replaced vulnerability. Accusation replaced confession. You've changed, they said, but what they meant was, you no longer carry what I refuse to confront. Jung observed that when unconscious support is withdrawn, the ego feels attacked, even betrayed. The psyche prefers familiar suffering to unfamiliar responsibility. So it lashes out, not out of malice, but out of fear. Meanwhile, the one who stopped sharing the pain encountered their own transformation. With the emotional space newly available, buried thoughts surfaced. Exhaustion that had been normalized suddenly demanded attention. Anger appeared, not loud, but sharp and clear. Grief arose for the years spent mistaking emotional labor for intimacy. Jung believed that individuation begins when we reclaim energy invested in others' complexes. This was that beginning. Pain once carried for another returned as self-awareness. The suffering person, now unsupported, faced a crossroads without realizing it. One path led deeper into resentment, into the narrative of abandonment, into the belief that the world is cruel because it no longer cushions their wounds. The other path, far more frightening, led inward, toward accountability, toward questions they had never asked themselves because someone else had always absorbed the discomfort. Jung insisted that neurosis persists until it is experienced consciously. Without someone to share it, the pain demanded attention in a new way. Slowly, something shifted. The pain changed texture. It became less dramatic, more personal. Without an audience, suffering lost its performance. It became quieter, heavier, but also more honest. The person began to notice patterns. The same disappointments, the same reactions, the same expectations placed on others. Jung would call this the emergence of the shadow into consciousness. Pain that is not shared becomes a mirror. Not everyone survives this stage with grace. Some retreat. Some replace the listener with another. Pain seeks witnesses the way fire seeks oxygen. But if no replacement arrives, transformation becomes unavoidable. The psyche, deprived of external soothing, turns inward not out of wisdom but necessity. This is where real change begins, not with insight, but with discomfort. The relationship between the two people now existed in a strange neutrality. No drama, no rescue, no collapse, just distance. And within that distance, truth began to breathe. The suffering person no longer felt understood, but they felt something new: ownership. The pain was theirs again. Terrifying, yes, but also strangely grounding. Jung believed that suffering integrated becomes strength, while suffering shared endlessly becomes identity. The one who stopped sharing pain noticed another change: compassion without entanglement. They could see the other's struggle without drowning in it. They could care without carrying. This was not cruelty, it was differentiation. Jung called this the separation of souls, a necessary step toward wholeness. Love that consumes individuality is not love, but mutual possession. Over time, the suffering person's language changed. Fewer accusations, more pauses, more questions directed inward rather than outward. Pain, now undiluted, had forced a conversation with the self. Not a pleasant one, but an honest one. Jung wrote that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. In a similar way, the greatest burden one adult can carry is the unlived responsibility of their own psyche. When someone stops sharing your pain, they hand that burden back to you. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no apology scene, no poetic closure, just quiet evolution. Two people standing separately, finally whole enough not to lean. The bond had changed from shared suffering to mutual recognition. And if they met again, it would not be as rescuer and wounded, but as equals, each responsible for their own darkness. This is how someone changes when you stop sharing their pain. At first, they break louder. Then they feel abandoned. Then they feel exposed. And finally, if they are brave, they grow. Jung believed that all meaningful change begins with the withdrawal of unconscious support. Only when the crutch is removed does the psyche learn to stand. And the one who stops sharing? They change too. They learn that empathy without boundaries is self-erasure. They learn that love does not require suffering. They learn that their purpose was never to be a container for another's wounds, but a witness to their own becoming. In stepping back, they did not become cold. They became real. Pain shared endlessly binds people in stagnation. Pain carried alone, consciously, transforms. This is the quiet truth Jung left behind, hidden between his words. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop sharing the pain and allow the soul to face itself. This is Today Reality. Please like and share this video.